Anyway, I'm here at Huntington Beach, Lifeguard Tower 18, my typical haunt every day, but particularly when I'm here on the weekends, on Saturdays, to do my book reading. The waves are particularly high. Look at that, guy's surfing right there. And the waves are particularly, they're not big, it's just that the tide is a little high and they're breaking, double break right here on the shore. And it's washing up and onto the beach. Just like I had that experience a few weeks ago where I lost all my audio gear because of the big rogue wave. I'm in danger of that again from a big wave like that, swooping up here just like this and creeping onto the sand. But I'm far enough back, I think I'm okay. So we'll see. And then afterwards, I'll go for a swim. Oh, good, there's somebody there. Hey, whoever who just arrived, can you tell me, can you hear me? Is there any audio? Is the audio working? I had a bit of a technical issue with the audio. I'd love to have a sound check before I get started. If you can hear this, if you could just leave a little comment saying okay or not, that would be appreciated. If not, I'll just go ahead and carry on, perhaps in mute silence. We're here to read another chapter of Going Alone. Today I'm going to read the chapter titled My Muse is a Corpse, a strange chapter written to describe the dead inspiration that I discovered in the desert that told me that of the story of Going Alone. It didn't tell me the story, it motivated me to tell the story. Possessed me at times, seemingly, with an inspiration that drove me to continue to write. And I did write for 3 years. Finished the book in that time and was able to carry on. So I'm going to set this up right here and let's begin our book reading. And hopefully the waves will come up and steal the show like last time. All right. My Muse is a Corpse. And this is my book Going Alone, of course. And My Muse is a Corpse has the chapter should have an illustration, as all these chapters do. There it is. So My Muse is a Corpse, and then there's a poem, and then this illustration by my daughter of the homunculus, the little man within the man, that figures itself throughout the book. It's my substitute for the concept of a soul. Let's begin. My Muse is a corpse, sensing we are alone. And there's a quote here by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Here we go. The world's broad, bleak atmosphere was all so comfortless. Such, indeed, is the impression which it makes on every new adventurer, even if he plunges into it while the warmest tide of life is bubbling through his veins. I remember that feeling when I was a teen and then in my 20s, especially when I would adventure alone. As Hawthorne says, bleak atmosphere was all so comfortless. Yeah, it's the thing that compelled me to come back and spend my life with my wife. I actually had embarked upon that road of solitary adventure and turned around and came back. And that, in the words of Frost, has made all the difference. Here we go. This section of my book chronicles the 3-week experience of having my desert inspiration follow me home to the city. I had no idea how long this muse would stay, though I'm glad I could record a little of what it had to say. This experience began on March 4th, 2017, and was complete on March 23rd. I have enjoyed a long relationship with my muse, which tends to arrive suddenly, urgently demanding I record my thoughts before she withdraws and leaves me with nothing more of substance to think or say. I first met my muse in my early 20s, while living alone for several years on an empty stretch of beach in Northern California. The muse would meet me sometimes at night while I walked alone along Moonstone Beach, just south of Trinidad, watching the sea glide up and back across the gentle shore slope, expiring in shallow, sweeping, wet sheets, the last energies of powerful waves crashing loudly in the distant dark. I would walk then with my moon dog, which was the name I gave the reflection of the moon upon the wet sand, glistening with a brilliant, cold, pale light, following me everywhere the earth was wet, a loyal companion in her every phase. The muse has since been with me always, through every decade of my life, speaking via the mediums of poetry, prose, art, and video. She visits at her leisure and pleasure, though I have found that activities such as walking alone, listening to music, and the moderate application of alcohol have a way of luring her out, though she never stays for long. And if I fail to listen or write down what she has to say when she's saying it, then her message will surely be lost. My muse will never speak to me in the presence of others, though sometimes I detect her voice when I read good books or hear interesting people talk. I have never fooled myself into thinking that my muse is anything more than my own creativity. I know there is no supernatural entity visiting me with inspiration, and I'm aware that this creativity is subject to my own circumstance and well-being, and that my muse will die with me, or perhaps one day falter and grow silent when my mental energies, which now produce her, begin to fail. This process has already begun, or my will and interest shift to elsewhere, or no place at all. Thus the urgency to write when the muse speaks, thus my desire to share both before she and I grow silent and are gone. The following words are the product of my muse, spoken to me at odd times, requiring I step aside from my work to write down what I hear, or pull my motorcycle to the side of the road to do the same. They tell a story in a way, in bits and pieces, ideas strung together over time, revealing a train of thought, buoyant of life, cognizant of death, and catalyzed of action. I am my muse's shadow author, though she and I both know that she never really exists. Now, we're going to switch over to the notes from my muse piece, but let me check to see if there's any comments from anybody telling me if the audio isn't working. Hi, Kurt. Liked your what? Liked your AI speech when you tried to explain it. Oh, thank you. Going to be a hard struggle. Audio is fine. Oh, thank you. I appreciate you letting me know, Mike. Great. All right. Let's carry on. Now, so the next bits are notes from my muse are, they're separate, right? The main body is this prose piece that I had to write to describe it. The muse bits, the writing from the muse are these left justified italicized sections that always begin with notes from my muse. And I do these because they're like lightning strikes, like I like to describe them, muse strikes, I call them. They're like strikes of inspiration, verbiage and words that just appear in my head perfect. I mean, I never have to edit them. When I write them down, they just come out perfect. Whereas the prose bits that I write here, such as this, center justified, and they go left to right, and non-italics. That I have to work at for weeks and weeks and weeks. This I don't have to work at. That's why I separate them away. There's something different. There's something separate, something akin to magic almost in the way these words come in. And I couldn't write them again if I tried. And then when I feel the muse inspiration coming, I have to pull over, stop whatever the hell I'm doing to get it down before it's lost. So here we go. There's a whole series of these. The remaining sections of this chapter are all the muse bits. They were laid here. What was happening was that during this period, I didn't intend to write this chapter. During this period, I kept getting these, I was going to the desert and I kept getting these inspiration thoughts that would cause me to pull over to the side of the road and write down whatever I was doing. It was happening time after time for this one long period of time, or a short period of time relatively, and I think it was just 3 weeks. And I realized when it was done that something had happened there, like I had almost been visited by some inspiration that had told a story. And I collected those muse strikes and I put them into a chapter, called it My Muse is a Corpse, which I really struggled with that name because I knew that was kind of an inflammatory name. You're just using the words corpse, deliberately lowercase m. There's no agency there. And then I put them together in chronological order as I best remember them, as in the way that they occurred, and taking them out of social media posts, and then wrapped it around that with some prose at the beginning to introduce it, the piece I just read, and there was the chapter. It was then from there that I realized that I could begin to add those muse sections to the end of every chapter, because throughout the book, while I was writing the book, this kept happening to a lesser extent, and that's how the book structure happened that way. So the prose, followed by the notes from my muse. So let's begin with the notes from my muse. Again, I'll read one strike. Let me just show you again. The Muse strikes are laid out, like I said before, in these sections here. You see there's a paragraph, and then there's a tilde mark here, and then a paragraph and a tilde mark here. And there's no dates or time entries here. It's just sufficient that this is the order in which they occurred. So I'll read that clear on through, then I'll have a pause, and then I'll read the next one. I won't say I'm moving progressively on. I'll just provide the pause to let you know. Kurt, when did your family leave, and what are you going to do? They haven't left yet. They're leaving in the spring of this next year, 2024, and then I'll stay here until December. So December 16th is my last day of work. So and then after that, I'll go to Japan. But Yumiko and Emily will go first in June. Then I'll have half a year by myself in America before I go. Kind of just like when we came over. I was here first, alone. Then they came over, and then we were together, and then they'll leave, and I'll be alone again. And then we'll be together again. Ooh, there's a big wave. Here we go. Notes from my muse. It's flattery to call my muse a corpse, as she is so much less, having never been alive. She has no still heart, no snuffed out conscience, no darkened lattice of memory, and certainly no legacy of love and caring to echo through time in life's wake. I call her dead by means of convenience, to call attention to what she has not, to highlight how far she is removed from the dearest possessions of life, and to enshrine her grave indifference with the startling, fearful aspect of what cannot possibly love and has more in common with sand than the buoyant, striving, animate community of life. So that was the first strike. Then I'll have a pause, and then I'll begin the next one, and so on. My muse is blind, deaf, mute, and dead. She is the inorganic fact of reality, the inanimate ambition of entropy, the chill, dark waste between the stars, the uncaring substrate of physics and chemistry, bound, secured, and destined toward some emotionless mathematical end. Crossing now from the place where I share life with humanity into the vast void of indifference, I at once find my own voice again. At last, the muse returns. Yesterday's long desert sojourn was a new experience of indifference, a recognition that the cold shoulder of nature is made of stone. Yesterday's desert hike left little impression at the time. Almost a disappointment, in fact. Yet in hindsight, I re-see those far and empty places. My thoughts come back to them over and again. I'm haunted by this past weekend's hike like no hike before. I'm pretty sure I went farther than I should, deeper than I thought I could. My reward, the deepest drought of indifference my mind can yet withstand. Such an awful, fearful, terrible truth. My muse is a nihilist, whispering cold words describing the eternity of empty beyond death. She'll meet me only in lonesome places, like a conspirator or a thief. But really, she's a confidant, and perhaps my most honest friend, though she laughs at my fear and mocks my every vain hope. It's curious how the muse was nearly silent during my adventure last week in the deep water wilds. She normally only talks to me when I'm alone and at risk in very wild places. Instead, she followed me home this time to whisper barely audible thoughts throughout the week, touching my shoulder during meetings, suggesting ideas during my commute, smiling at me through a distant crowd. I wonder how long she'll stay, why she now talks to me here, what brought her in from indifference. It seems my muse did not follow me back from the wild to inspire my words, but instead to catalyze my will. How much easier to do right while hints of the void and empty swirl behind my head, and memory of the black mountains of indifference loom across the wasteland of dry earth. The thing which followed me out of the wild this week which I've been calling my Muse, isn't a ghost or spirit or a force or anything beyond the scope of my mind. It's simply a lingering impression, the sting following a hard slap in the face, the cold, deep, indifferent reality of nature, a lasting effect of meeting the dead gaze of a universe which doesn't care, doesn't feel, and doesn't know. I hope this impression lasts. Almost went to the wild today. I decided instead to attend to a few domestic life necessities. That's all right. It's not like the wildness gives a damn if I come to visit. The dead winds howl across the indifferent badlands, against and over the cold black mountains, through and along silent sand washes, to twist and bend the dry, thorny foliage, with or without my attendant failing gaze. The melancholy peace of a solitary walk in the desert has found footing in my everyday sojourn. The dull, dim, yet alert and living eyes, the sensitive hearing, the slow, purposeful stride towards nowhere in particular, along unseen and unmarked paths, and best of all, the rich and empty thinking which comes of lonesome, yet not lonely passage through strange, unpeopled places. A principle of deserts is that winds blow into their depths and point the way towards deeper desolation and the arid, disinterested heart of the wastes. While standing upon a broad and open plain at night, invisible mountains miles distant on either side, their outline visible only by the interruption of starlight through the cold, thin atmosphere, a thin, slight veil between the bare, stony ground and outer space, I shiver alone and cold, feeling the dead desert breath draw me in like a tide. The scope of my control extends to my actions and reactions and the consequences they might entail. Death is the realization of that creeping indifference. Sorry, there's a pause there. New one. Death is the realization of that creeping indifference which sweeps consciousness and being aside like fallen leaves and carries both memory and love along into the darkened night. To the quiet mind, indifference looms. No wonder then our myriad and incessant manufacture and attendance to distraction. The deep value of a solitary desert walk is the sobering recognition of a landscape and circumstance without any real escape. For though we may return to our warm bed and our fellows, the memory lingers of the cold night winds under the naked stars and the blistering sunlight across a vast landscape without refuge. Such impressions gain deep footing and purchase within the mind, but only when we go alone, and only when we go so far as to glimpse the very real and near point of no return. To a mind which has risen above fortune, both the necessary and superfluous actions of the day become like attendance to a disinterested game of chess. For while our mind and body must periodically engage the game and move the pieces, our deeper attendance is to matters more worthy of our true character and aim. Do you attend your dying breath in this present moment? How much more worthy a pursuit than philosophy? I'd rather reckon each exhalation in deep, fastidious awe than the gilded words of the holy and wise. Indeed, if their wisdom be true, they'd silence their speech and mind in mute attendance of their own mortality and the consequent vista thus revealed. The fallow field of the well-lived life is the time between riches, fame, and security, a time to cultivate a more true and honest harvest. Oh, I need to remember that one now. The price of leisure is attendance to the fact of who we are and the choices we've made. It's no wonder then we sometimes choose for ourselves the slave's abject distraction. The sober subject of our life's decline arrives so often late to the feast and long before the diner has enjoyed their fill. There's a similar sensation of precious anxiety, which results of descending 40 feet beneath the sea on a single breath, or hiking 4 miles off trail into the stark and barren wild, but only if you go alone. Not only the fact of humanity, but all trace or reminder of our race must be left behind before we can truly sense there is no God. Reason is the arbiter of virtue. What other force can provide a more accurate or worthy measure? I have this plan which I'll never fulfill, for I am a family man and must respect the sensitive conscience of those who love and care about me. However, if I were alone in life and received my physician's forecast of pending death, and were to have this counsel affirmed by a qualified another, then I'd make provision for a last and final journey into the wild. The desert, of course, to find my end in the wastes, alone and without succor, to face down indifference in its own awful light, stark and devoid, pale and blinding, cold and incapable of care. I wonder how I could handle such a last adventure. Could my mind bear with peace such a truth, even as the light and carrying of my own being flickers and fades into the dark, cold void? My muse seems lately at ease with her new surroundings, a transplant of the desert wastes to the living suburbs. Her mute voice speaks, as always, of her home in the wind and the night, remembers the empty badlands, the colored soils, and the unending progress of time. She looks around her new surroundings, dead eyes seeing nothing past the here and now, no regard for humanity, no love of virtue or charity, no preference or admiration for what is alive or dead. No wonder she seems so at home when I now realize she was here all along. How like a hermit crab I have become, so insular and self-contained. My needs, of course, extend to society. Indeed, I'd die without my fellows, and I like to hope my fellows might need me in some small way. Though beyond the substance of my person, I find now ample nourishment for the mind and spirit in such dull pursuits as the marking of time and the vain cataloging of the many treasures I am so fortunate not to possess. I had an interesting talk with a friend today where I confessed my nihilism and found comfort in not giving a damn. Such is how the serpent consumes its own tail. Hiking in the desert with my daughter is like sailing a boat upon the sea with a long tether tied to the dock. Emily and I visited the human femur I discovered in the desert last year. It's still there, despite the fact I'd notified the police. Maybe they didn't find it. Perhaps they gave up the search. After all, the bones are literally in the middle of nowhere. It's possible they determined the bones aren't human, though this seems unlikely given the absence of large wildlife in the area and the perfect match to human anatomy. I was rather surprised to note how much the bones had deteriorated since my last visit. Further proof that our essence is essentially animated dust. I plan to call the sheriff's office again and offer to take them to the spot. It was strange being in the deep desert today without my dead muse. Where could she have been? I suspect it's because I didn't go alone. In fact, I know that's the cause. I did see signs of her presence in the wind and across the darkened landscape and in moments of subtle extrospection. Though to hear her words, her cold words rise within my mind, I must remember to first deny myself the warmth of any companion, and to face fully and alone the fact of all mortal dissolution and oblivion. Only then will the muse speak to me her mute inspiration. Though my muse is not alive, she nevertheless enjoys some apparent will and motive force. Her composition is maintained of gravity, and her limbs and appendages are driven of starlight and wind. Her attitudes and moods are as varied as the composition of rocks and soil, and her intellect and modesty the product of vast space and deep time. Some very small part of her does have an organic pulse, This is true, though this soft rhythm is utterly drowned out by the roar and cacophony of nature's inanimate rush towards entropy. Though my muse is not alive, her words and law-like meaning nevertheless ring clear in my brain whenever I muster the courage to look past the warm company of fellowship and the reassuring clamor of minds to the intense dark beyond the firelight and the deep abyss beyond life. It's interesting how my daughter did not share my fear in the wild yesterday. She seemed at ease in a place I've practically run from in the past. That slippery granite mountaintop where I first caught sight of the hidden heart of the volcano wilderness. I felt an echo of that old fear yesterday as we ate our lunch together upon that wind-swept peak, gazing over and down into a place where my dead muse lives. I'm confident her comfort was in part a result of our company, and I do wonder what she might have thought or felt there alone, in a place so silent my daughter at one time commented she could hear her own heartbeat. Would the muse speak to her? Would my daughter fain have ever come? Does her young mind perhaps require more years to better apprehend what isn't there in the desert wastes? Is it possible such absence simply goes unseen to those unfamiliar with its hollow circumstance and empty aspect? My father's legacy, all those worries at the bottom of the sea. The wild places of the California desert have proven so much more potent a font of inspiration than the mountains of Japan. I suspect, though, that this has more to do with the characteristics of desert than any condition of place or quality of time. How blind I was to the desert muse before Japan. Though I could never find her voice while I was away at that exotic land, sure still her absence had I never gone. If I'd remained in Japan, my sight would have continued its myopic plunge into the familiar. The green and wet mountains and valleys there rising and widening in scale and contrived importance, ossifying at last into a worldview of comprehensible dimension and satisfying importance. I would have, at last, died in my course there, satisfied of my living career, placated by my narrow worldview, an invalid, comforted by my own deep ignorance. Since returning to America, though, I face the familiar with alien eyes and foreign design. There is no more latent comfort in what once was all I knew. My weary eyes strain to discover the familiar. Old brain circuits crackle to life, mending failed, flawed, or erred mental connections with material of another land and culture, values and meanings of a second and quite completed life. So I thought. Tired limbs now become limber of the necessity of building this new life again, and old muscle memory is replaced with fresh reflex, guided of matured control and sensibility. It is with this reborn self that I have encountered and connected with my desert muse, found her fleeting across the wastes, utterly lost and invisible to the man I was and was again, visible only now as such a one as I could surely never meet or know over the course of just a single lifetime. Boy, was I wouldn't say that it was wrong about that. Well, at the time that I wrote this, I didn't think that there would be a place for Japan in my future, but I was wrong about that, I guess. Well, we'll see, right? The faculty of choice is most keenly exercised at rough and unexpected life juncture. Does misfortune rise in our way? Does death approach? Is it not now in our power to exercise discretion and judgment in recognizing what is within our control? Have we not utter claim over our thoughts, actions, and reactions? Do we not possess the ability to watch with equanimity as our fortunes rise and fall again, correcting our course with judicious turns of the rudder, aiming for the open sea, yet breathing calmly as we become ruined upon the rocks and plunge beneath the waves? Our opinion and judgment of things lies outside the pale of all external forces besides ignorance, disease, and death, which may first weaken and then destroy our resolve and capacity to stand. But until that time, we've power enough to select and will our own footing, to observe and recognize the vast machinery of the universe's headlong tumble towards tomorrow, and to know both the scope and scale of our meager influence. As I have no one to pray to, I'll instead suggest an admonition to myself. Let my footsteps be, just, clarity. I'm not praying to myself. I'm using this as a vehicle to correct myself. Here's the corrections. Let my footsteps be slow today, to delay the world in its orbit and force time to better measure and dispense its precious ration. Let my mealtime portions be small. Let me endure the healthy want of food in proportion to my usual excess. Let me then grow lean and strong as a consequence, better able to survive, endure, and appreciate the true suffering of those without. And let my thoughts be very few and small, just some simple words this hour and the next, ideas sufficient to my true need, or better still, my honest lack thereof. What philosophy, maxim, or dogma can withstand the scrutiny of solitude in deep, wild places? In fact, if we linger too long alone, then madness may steal the show under the guise of sagacity. Be careful then to first uncover and refine truth within the bustling tumult of everyday life, to then temper what is found in the cold light of empty nowhere. Such understanding then is forged of humanity, hardened of nature, and activated of your improved subsequent living. Tell no one what you found, yet answer honestly every pointed inquiry. How much better a retiring mind than a retiring body? The first may be attained at any stage in life, at least so far our philosophy permits. The latter only upon leisure and the gross accumulation of sustaining resources. Liberate the mind at once through the discipline of reason, and you may then work hard to the end of your days in contented leisure. That's an aspiration for sure. What number of individuals is required to tame the wild? 2. No more are needed, though greater numbers are certainly better to this end. No individual, no matter their will, resolve, or strength, can ever civilize even the humblest blade of grass. Only in company, or better still, society, can this great feat be achieved. What opportunity this? Does my leg ache? Fortitude. Does my neighbor complain? Patience and an attentive ear. Have I lost my job or reputation or security? Resilience and apathy. Does my life now come to an end? Resignation to facts, and a loving smile to those from whom I must now depart. The penalty of actually incurring the risks which appear so present and fearful during youth is less terrible than the punishment of their aversion, which must be sustained and borne when we are old and our opportunities have passed. Youth is the time to assuage midlife regret. Occupied with distraction from cradle to grave, our lives pass with little notice or regard of the wilderness void which is our eternal inanimate home. Our certain dissolution and apparent finality of being is masked with unreasoned promise of hidden tomorrows, filled with answered hopes, happy reunion and joyous reconciliation. We turn to death in our time, chanting, "There is more, there is more," while the evident nothing envelops us like a tide. Our deceived corpse, no longer capable of care, dissolves to matter and energy. Our last, utterly conscienceless act, the slight tipping of the scale in the balance of entropy. How better, or perhaps more desperate, our lives should we give up the unfounded myth that there is something more. Tempered consumption forms a firm bedrock to philosophy. Observe appetite with caution, as you would any passion. Sample it to determine if it is mean, base, or sound. If wholesome, partake less than you'd like. Leave always the appetite wanting. Become strong through willful resistance. If our temptation is unsavory, empty, or lacking in virtue, then leave it aside altogether. Starve instead on a feast of fortitude. Picking my way carefully down the mountainside, Did I really climb so far? Was it really then so steep? My declining thoughts are a mix of the inspiration of the lofty vision my progress had attained, coupled with concern about the darkness in the valley below, growing deeper with every minute, creeping slowly towards me up the mountain. Such a long day it's been, such a fine day for climbing. How did I lose track of the time? Instead of photos now, I choose instead to simply think. Credulity puts on airs with the feigned dignity of dogma and the false virtue of faith. Better to go through life without answers than to believe without good reason. Very soon my life will fold in on itself and wink out like the dim candle it has always been. Yet my muse will remain. Being dead and having never been alive, my muse has the capacity to persist beyond me. She will carry no memory of me besides the fading influence of my words and deeds. My muse cannot miss me, speak my name, or remember me to another. My anonymity is scarcely more secure in the grave than when my pulse was beating, and I had some voice to be known. My dead muse keeps perfect secrets, is incapable of telling truth or lies, is the perfect confidant. I've declined to a place where my poverty is secure from fortune. I've so little of real worth that my desire for more is fully satiated. I owe no mortgage to reason, own outright my capacity to choose, pay no tax on apathy, and wield discretion like a sovereign. This outpost of peace was always near within my recognized ignorance, easily attained though the journey required 50 years. I owe thanks to Seneca, Epictetus, Aurelius, Emerson, Thoreau, Sagan, Attenborough, and Bixler for suggesting the way. Especially Bixler, who I was talking to just last week. I might go visit him. I've begun the process of watching an acquaintance fail in business. It's a venture in which he's likely gambled everything and thus has everything to lose. I don't know why I'm laughing. I guess laughing in remembrance of my own loss of everything. Which certainly wasn't a laughing matter at the time, but is now for me. I've been there myself twice, and the memory is so real it's almost tactile. I laid up late last night staring at the ceiling, thinking of him. I'll bet he was staring at his ceiling too, just like I used to do. Beginning to drown, going down through a form of death which isn't really dying. Apathy arms us with the same indifference which the universe wields in the execution of its mindless purpose. We stride through life bestowing benevolence in true proportion to our capacity, sharing unalloyed generosity and love, rich in the giving, expecting nothing in return. Returning from solitary adventures in the mountains of Japan, the rugged landscape persisted in my head like an intimate and cloistered hideaway. The desert, however, unfolds in the mind like a great and empty map, devoid of sanctuary, exposed and utterly impersonal. The will of apathy is neither mean nor small attention, but freedom from undue investiture, to apply our focus and efforts wisely, to make good and useful ends of our days, to be a benefit to mankind and not burn our energies over useless kindle and conflagration. The optimist's bright luster cannot be dulled by apathy, nor their charity, kindness, or philanthropy. Indeed, these qualities are enhanced and made potent through a distilled and refined focus, the narrow and distinct possession of mind which comes of knowing what is and what is not within our own control. Our true, and perhaps only, essential purpose is etched into our being with the imperative of desire and the awful threat of living and dying alone. It's a mindless drive, truly requiring no thought. We live our purpose on autopilot, fulfilling its mandate with the satisfaction of every instinctual whim, an easy way to live and a satisfying way to die. Life is orphaned from the start. our progenitor having more in common with a stone than the loving parent we might hope to deserve. We stand and gaze across the wild for some sign of kin and kind, our eyes drawn at last to the sky and stars in lazy, hazy remembrance of dim, indifferent origins. Actually, just hazy, not lazy, hazy. I think I got a song started to come to mind there. We awake, our fresh senses alive and new and electric with perception. At once we begin our locomotion, stepping and grabbing and speaking. We're never lost, not for a moment, though our minds may despair of purpose or meaning or direction or worthy end. Indeed, a deep mandate has the reins, a singular worthy end. But there's one direction, one meaning that really matters, a consolidated purpose, driving and quite distinct. It's the first time that's ever happened. Where was I? I was asked today by a friend about my thoughts on the topic of worthwhile employ. Should the best occupation yield leisure and option to my heirs? Provide a catapult and catalyst to the next generation's situation and state? At the time I was asked, I thought such a name both worthy and admirable. But upon some reflection, I see now little good in laying up my days against the improvement of my heirs. For if the better aim of virtue is a mature capacity of wisdom, enlivened with fortitude, made lean and impervious of apathy, and grave of self-control, then how much better to offer our heirs, instead of wealth, the worthy example of our well-born poverty, and the steady resolve and still motion of a body and mind at peace with self-control. How might I become impervious to well-being, develop an immunity to good fortune, and make the good life a reality despite every blessing? My poverty cannot withstand the price of so much good fortune. My tribe are those who currently stand among brambles, wondering how they got there, bleeding a bit from the thorns, observing no trail back. Perhaps a book like Walden sent them this way, though by now they've far less use of a guide. Indeed, what wildness is this that requires a guide when every direction is in and there's now far too few rations for retreat? My tribe will know this place, though none of them are about. They'll find me here long after I'm dead. I'll leave them some marks. I sometimes spot marks of those who have gone before me, faint, strange, nearly indecipherable the further I go. There are older marks still, appearing fresh as the day they were made. What should I tell my child on the use of time? Should I caution her simply to be mindful of its passage, to measure each moment with her attentions and keep busy with the application of sober utility? Should I recommend foresight towards the life she may want to live? If so, how do I caution her not to reside too long in the fiction of what might be, or against setting up house in the past, or living as a ghost within the life of another? I must indeed offer caution against the waste of moments, which is the sport and pastime of so many, the impatient counting down of hours towards an ignoble and seemingly untimely death. Yes, I'll instruct her to beware all this and more, to mind carefully what is ahead and what is past, to not lose sight of her own way by ingracious attention to the footsteps of others, and to know her true and even course not by the landmarks of her surroundings or the warmth of the air or the pleasant company or the ease of the road, but instead by the satisfying perception of firm footing over any ground, any fortune, and for as long as her daylight remains. Our genetic inertia propels us towards ends we rarely consider. Sex, love, marriage, and even Jesus proclaim our mute acceptance of responsibility to the survival of our species. Our blind allegiance binds this mandate to action, The veil may never rise for us, though the ones to whom we may one day become God should certainly pity our narrow vision and quite constrained understanding. And by that, this was like 8 years ago. I was referring to AI, artificial intelligence there. I remember that, although I didn't say it outright. Society bears down with a crushing weight of responsibility, while the wild bears down with the weight of necessity. The consequence of failure in the first circumstance may be destitution and disgrace, while failure in the second punishes with death and extinction. Going alone, then, into the wild relieves for a moment the first and lesser burden in exchange for the thrill and challenge of a more base and primal threat. When we return from wild places alive and mostly intact, our perspective is changed and temporarily revised. For what threat really is any office censure, any mere social disgrace, an embarrassing fumble of etiquette, or even failure in love or enterprise, compared with what we've just met and mastered? The more consequent danger is now past, and we move on through the day with a contented grace, having brought back a hidden trophy and prize in the simple fact of our survival. But this peace is perishable, requiring refresh at regular intervals. Thus we again mistake the civilized challenge of responsibility with the wild threat of necessity. The human project is the occupation of attention until we run out of time. Death arrives and we're no longer forced to perceive. Indifference is the thing we do not want, for if we quiet our minds enough, something which isn't really there becomes apparent. And if we separate ourselves far enough from our fellows, there it isn't again. To apprehend this startling absence through dead landscapes or still mind is like sensing a ghost which isn't real, a frightening paradox to not behold. So instead of not seeing, we first do this, then we do that, and then yet another thing, and then we die. Hopefully well distracted by the community and clamor of loved ones whose presence and attention assure us there's more than nothing in the end. Make your great life adventure early in life, when you've both everything and nothing to lose. The gamble then is more secure in your favor, the likelihood of success augmented by your ignorance and inability to recognize or assess risk. You'll succeed even if the adventure kills you. Just don't get pregnant, and in so doing, assume your own risk onto the life of an innocent another. Save that wondrous adventure for later, when you've had your fill of yourself and are more mature and ready to truly give. For your adventure's venue, select what appears alien and strange, a curious and seemingly foreign life street or some exotic backwater of nowhere. Go meet your anxiety and give it a fair listen. Rebuke its fearful claims and hysterical protests. Come away satisfied you know better your mind and can now answer and assuage its ancient, unsound fears. You'll know when your adventure is done, when you possess fewer dreams of tomorrow and behold a broad and expansive landscape of today. Oh, and go alone, if you can bear it. If not, then take, or better still make, a friend along the way. You'll find your tribe is out there. Your mind is on a track. There's actually very little leeway between birth and death. The course is strikingly simple, though we don't notice due to our one chance at living and the fact that our perspective biases us to exaggerate what little difference there really is between one life and the next, and one generation to the next. Gender plays a role in the course we must live, as does age, though these aren't very popular topics to discuss. Please keep that in mind and listen to what your nature has to say, even if you choose not to heed. For informed choice brings both responsibility and accountability into the hands of the chooser. Always apply reason to your biology, capital B, explained later in the book, elsewhere in the book, I should say. And always demand diplomacy of your motives. Oh, it's earlier in the book, yeah, in the chapter titled The Cast. Always demand diplomacy of your motives. Always seek virtue of your wants or deny them altogether. In this way, never hesitate to resist your nature should it prove base, barbarous, unjust, or inhumane. So you'll bump along this course of living, fortune, heaving you at once to the left and next to the right, but always forward and at a steady rate, even when at rest, even when you decide not to choose. Remember that you'll always be on those rails, and there's nothing spiritual or spooky or inexplicable about them. So don't get suckered into motivation, divination, or exorcism to change your way. Instead, ride the rails like the successful survivor you have become. We have become. We've all become, by virtue of the simple fact we're alive. You see, excuse me. You see, biology's, capital B, criteria for success is both simple and absolute. This message, by the way, is for my daughter. So ride your rails to the end of the line, and if you choose, pass carefully your successful mandate into the future, as your mother and I have done through our loving creation of you. So that particular Muse strike was aimed at Emily. It's been over a month now since my dead Muse followed me back from the desert. She's always right here whenever my mind falls away from the fore. She lurks like a shadow and a memory, though her cold presence is now devoid of the fearful substance I remember of our first encounter. How my breath was taken away at that first sight at the edge of the volcano wilderness. I wonder if she saw me then too. Did she know me before? I certainly never knew anything prior so awful in the wild, though there was that one cold night 30 years back. That night I passed alone within a vast desert empty, an empty which brushed past my tent while I slept, threatening my youth with its whispered age and inviting me out of the tent to shiver barefoot and exposed while gazing up at the dark night and across at the black empty. I was young then, perhaps too alive to see. Maybe that's the reason she's here now. Are my eyes simply opened? Was she here all along? Will she ever leave? I think I know the answer, though it's perhaps best I keep that supposition to myself. How much is enough? For myself, it is enough to stop asking this question. For if my ethics are sound, my reason keen, and my intent judicious, then there will always be just enough of every endeavor. So instead of asking after the quality of things, I should instead seek after their quality. It's after the quantity of things, I should instead seek after their quality. How sound today my ethics, how keen my reason, how judicious my intent. Let me then tune my social machinations to run silent, efficient, and true, satisfied that whatever product is the result of whatever quantity is utterly sufficient to the good life. Where will you set up house? Though the body must reside in some shelter of a sort to keep it safe and warm, the mind needs only space and liberty sufficient to exercise its native capabilities and natural inclination. These places are not incompatible, though an excess of the former may indeed distract from the latter, while too much of the latter may cause disconnect from those who share our former. Is it possible my dead Muse has died? Is that even feasible? If not truly dead, she certainly seems less present. Perhaps it's because I've been so long from her dead home out there in the desert. Maybe the spell has simply worn off. She can't utterly be gone, as I hear her faint whisper now as I type these words, like a distant cold wind across a skeleton landscape of stones and sand, hushed and muffled, indifferent and absolute. And here's the last one. My dead Muse is gone. The only words which remain now are my own. These thoughts are familiar, though they come with the same labored effort I've known since youth, like pulling a heavy root from hard soil. It was easier when my dead Muse led the way, allowing me to follow behind as she stepped easily through abstraction, pointing the way towards silent impressions I cannot muster alone by way of my dull pedestrian life. I expect the trip back to the desert will secure our reunion, though I wonder if she'll ever follow me back here again. Has she perhaps seen enough of civilization's vain and glossy proposals of meaning? Has she had her fill of our fearful efforts to hold back her night? The words are gone. And that's the end of the chapter. Now, I'll tell you, after all these years since then, I can say that no, the Muse never really has come back in earnest or strength as she did during that 3-week period. I think it was a 3 weeks or 3 months period. I think it was 3 weeks. Never did. I can now reclaim her I can now reclaim her spirit, at least, in my own writing, though I know it's 100% me. It's just that through years and years of daily practice at writing, I can now do something that kind of, faint. It's like what was the word? What's the word? Some imposter. Like an imposter's writing. It's not the same though. I can't write like that anymore. But I think I could if I was to engage the Muse again. And to do so, I would need to then go alone, which I don't do anymore, at least not in earnest. Now maybe when I get to Japan I will, but again, it will not be in earnest because I'm no longer seeking that anymore. I've been there and I've come back. I don't need to go there anymore. If I go there, it will be incidental, happenstance. We'll see if the Muse has to talk to me then. Frankly, it's okay if the Muse doesn't. That's all been done. Let's see if there's any comments before I sign off and then go for a swim. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, okay. Thanks for joining me. Be safe, but not too safe. And now I'm going to go jump in the water and have a nice little swim. Can someone wait? Hold on. Oh, wait, there's more comments. Oh, there's all kinds of comments. Hold on, let me read this. Wow. What? Wow, there's a lot of stuff. Audio's fine, great. Yeah, you gave the idea to write going. What gave you the idea to write Going Alone? It just came together. I was writing kind of like just little essays, bits, from things. And after a while, I realized, wow, I could take all these essays together and make them into a book. And then I made them into a book and I gave it to a friend to read. And she commented to me, Kurt, this has got the structure of a book, but it needs some connecting tissue, so to speak. So I added a few chapters, an introduction, the cast chapter, the Stoic poetry chapter, and the conclusion to kind of round it off. And then I had a book. Kurt, when did your family leave? Oh, they're here. I think I answered that one earlier. Okay, continue reading. It's good stuff. Oh, thank you. Good. Hearts, thank you. Kurt, can you explain what Muse means to someone that may not understand it in 2 sentences? Muse is a classical representation of the inspiration that artists and writers have. It comes from, I believe it probably has deep origins, but at least I think of it as the Greeks and the Romans who had the thoughts of the muses that would then inspire us to think. And if you do artistic stuff, you may experience that at times where suddenly there's just an inspiration that comes like a lightning strike and you better get it down, and if you wait, it's gone. So look it up and you'll find that it's actually sometimes portrayed as individuals, usually young women. Mike says, because you say rocks may also have some feelings or none, but humans have feelings. What? Because you say rocks may also have some feelings or none, but humans have feelings, the Muse is something external, so that if in that case, doesn't it mean that there is something else after this? No, in my own case, the Muse, the reason I say it's a dead Muse is that it's not real. I'm denying the idea that the Muse is anything other than my own brain, simply wired at particular times, or operating in such a time by such inspiration as being in the desert that I'm able to produce the stuff that I do. I don't believe there is a Muse. That's why I call it dead. That's the meaning of it being a dead Muse. It's not real. I mean, some call it God. Maybe. I don't believe in God. What can we call it, an entity or the Muse? But can we call it an entity or the Muse? I think I explained that one. When you say we may be the only ones here, I agree with you. Maybe we just resize, and they would say in computing terms, resing. I don't know what that means. Resing is our own existence, perhaps. I'm not sure what that means. So what would that mean if it is true that must be something else after this life? I don't think there is. But I'm sure it is true, but don't think it needs a name. Hearts. Think of a triangle and all the points go to the same place in the end, to one corner, or understanding that corner came from somewhere. It could be like a time warp, but quantum physics wins, but still, I'll leave that to others to figure out. I don't know. Can't explain your point there about your Muse never goes away, but is only capable of knowing itself when you have some form. Muse comes from the outside of light and sound. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Can someone see it? Big Bang not really possible and never was, because there is no start and no end. Thanks for the book reading. You're welcome. Kurt, that was good. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for all the interesting, engaging comments. I'm going to go for a swim now. Have a great day. Be safe, but not too safe. Bye-bye.